Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Ready to turn up the heat on your competition and build an amazing brand that really matters to your customers? This is the Feed Your Business podcast. If your business is in a pickle or just needs a bigger slice of the pie, then join us every week to get the recipe for more customer referrals and higher retention, so you can increase revenue and enjoy more profits from the power of customer lifetime value. Now from the kitchen, your host, Scott Webb.
Hey guys, Scott Webb, Kitchen Traffic, Denver, Colorado. How's it going? This week we have a fantastic podcast episode for you. And you know our motto, feed your business. Well, we're going to show you how you can go out and get some of this excess cash. And when I say excess, I'm talking billions with a B that is available to you if you need some cash flow for your business. Listen, we're not out of this pandemic thing yet. Yeah, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, which is amazing. But I mean, how many of you out there lost a year's worth of revenue? You know, we did okay. We lost a few clients along the way. But, you know, cash flow, you can never take for granted. We want to give you some tools, some tips, some ideas, maybe a few things that you haven't even thought about on how to negotiate your way out of some back debt, how to apply and get access to this PPP, how to kind of get your books in order to make sure that you can maximize, you know, the cash that's available to you. So we're really excited to bring this special podcast to you. And Dan and I go deep. We also have a ton of links and information at the end of the podcast and in the podcast notes so that you guys can go direct to the sources and access all of this moolah that is out there, this cheddar, this cheese, this cash. We know that it's, you know, the pandemic is still, you know, not over with, and listen, every dollar counts, right? So we're going to help you find as many of those dollars as possible in this week's podcast. Without further ado, here's my buddy, Dan Kiel. But we are here today to talk to you about this thing called, man, I hate to use this word because it's so overused at this point, but the stinking pandemic, which is just keeps dragging on, but I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. And the reason why we wanted to bring Dan on is Dan is an expert in finance and works with a ton of businesses in and around Denver. And we're going to break down literally how you as a business can adapt to the downturn. I mean, that's what we've been doing, is this adapting to this downturn, but now maybe prepare for an upturn. And with that, there's a ton of new cash that has hit the system that is available to small businesses and obviously families alike that are in desperate need. But we'll also talk about some of the businesses that are thriving through this too, and what we can learn from them. So Dan, thanks so much for joining the podcast. Can't wait to break this down. You're such an insight. I mean, every time we meet, it's just like we have this this great exchange of knowledge, and I know you love to share
Yes.
what's you know, not only works for you, but works for your clients as well. So thank you again. So my first question is, you're safe, no COVID?
No COVID, no COVID. Thankfully, I believe I've avoided it. I've only needed to get one COVID test because I was in close proximity of somebody that did come down with COVID, but I came back clean, and I haven't had any of the other symptoms during the time. So I'm looking forward to the day when I can get the shot. I think I might have to wait for the general public range, but I'm okay with that. Let's you know, look towards the future and hope for a happy and healthy one.
Yeah, for sure. I think the virtual hug will be around for a while. And so I do look forward to, I have one client, he's like 6'5", 300 pounds. And every time we meet, it's a giant bear hug, and I miss that hug, right? But I get plenty at home, so no problem. Yeah, when we actually originally recorded a version of this podcast a few months ago, and in that point, you know, the loans that were coming out for small business, the PPP and others were, you know, these lifelines being tossed out, and I think I read somewhere the other day that there's still a few $1 billion of, some of those funds still available.
Yes.
But one of the things that we're going to talk about is actual tactics. And Dan has forwarded me a list of resources and links to at where you can go if you're not taking advantage of these resources. But we wanted to break down too today in our conversation is, just what's available, how to go get it,
Yes.
why it's available, and then let's even bring in some things that you've actually experienced. Maybe within the bank. You don't have to share names, but a story or two where some people are utilizing these resources, saving their business. We're all kind of listen. There's almost like, what do they call it? There's two sides of the coin, right? You got the haves and the have-nots, and the pandemic has seemed to have created that delineation even more.
Yes.
But for those that listen, making payroll one more week could make the difference, especially right now
Yeah.
because they're starting to, what do they call it? The restrictions are getting less.
Mhm.
They're starting to allow more, especially in our restaurant friends and hospitality businesses. I think even Coors Field's supposed to allow, like 20,000 people this year.
They got a special exemption for opening day specifically
Okay.
because
Okay.
they were going to be less. It was going to be like 12,000 or 15,000, something like
Sure.
that. But then they got a special release for opening day. And then I believe they're selling tickets in like 4-person pods. So
Okay.
you can group your little group together and sit together, but then they need space. And then they're just going to space people out and do it the best they can.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting baseball.
But that helps all those businesses downtown,
Yes, absolutely.
that are going to, have all those fans before and after the game. And so, yeah, I mean, listen, the title of this is Nobody Asked for the Pandemic. And I really feel for all the businesses that have,
Yes.
that literally, almost overnight, they didn't have a choice. Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what's available. We've talked about EIDL and other programs. Can you explain some of those to our
Sure.
listeners?
Sure. So the EIDL is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. It is through the SBA. Okay. It is not the same thing as the PPP. It is something that is set up generally. A disaster loan is set up when you get like floods or hurricanes or earthquakes. It could be even fires that ravage, like when the fires went through the mountains. Right? You can have an area declared as a disaster zone. Once it's declared as a disaster zone, then you can apply for these disaster loans from the SBA. In the case of coronavirus, the entire country was declared a disaster zone. And
Mm,
in this case, it was an economic disaster. So they created the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. If you Google that, most likely you're going to get the SBA's website comes up right off the bat. That is where you would apply for this loan. If you have been economically injured by the pandemic, you can apply for the loan. It's based on gross receipts. You put in information. There's like a 5-step process to do your initial application. If they consider you as, yes, you've been economically injured, then they ask for a whole bunch more paperwork to follow up. You can get up to $2 million. Again, it's based on gross sales. So there's going to be a factor in there. You can't just get $2 million if you had $30,000 in sales last year.
darn.
Yeah. But it's a 30-year loan,
Wow.
fully amortizing at 3.75%. That is cheap money. So it gets reduced by any PPP dollars that you received on the first round. I'm not entirely sure how it's affected by the second round of PPP, but it is affected by the first round, mostly because they figure that in and say, well, if you're going to receive that money for
Yeah,
free, then we're just going to reduce your loan by that amount. They
sure.
ask all that information, just follow through the steps.
It's called
But
double
this could
dipping.
That's right. That's right. So this money can be a huge lifeline for your business. If you think you might need it, get it, hold on to it. You're going to be making payments, but your payments are going to be very small. It's better to have the money and not need it
Mm,
than need the money and not have it. And if you run into another situation where all of a sudden another round of restrictions comes down,
sure.
and you need that extra money to keep your business going, or even if you're buying more takeout containers, or you had to buy pods to be able to put people in, all of a sudden you're having all this extra money spent. Having access to be able to do that to keep your business running can really be the difference between surviving and not surviving.
Right.
And you don't have to go through a bank through it. It's all through the SBA. It is a bit of a process because of all the paperwork that you have to do, but it's better than not having the money. And ultimately, if you end up having that sit there and never end up needing it, and you decide you want to pay it back, you can pay it back. There's no
Pay it back,
prepayment
yeah.
penalty on these loans. So it's a nice lifeline, and I fully recommend, if you have not already looked into it, please do look into it.
Cool.
Beyond that, there's now 2 rounds of PPP money that are available. If you did not apply for the first round of PPP money, good news, you can still apply for that first round of PPP money.
Oh,
They
wow.
opened it back up with the gosh, what's the program called? The American Rescue Plan Act that passed in December. Okay, that's where we're getting a lot more money injected. That's the $3 trillion, something like that, that's getting pumped back into the economy. A ton of new programs opened up because of that, including second round PPP, and reopening the first round because there ended up being money left after they funded it the second time. So if you never applied for a PPP loan, you still have to apply for round 1. You can't just immediately go to round 2.
Okay.
But that's good because there's less restrictions with round 1. Look into the process. There's links that we'll share through this that I've given to Scott that give all of the information that you need on how to calculate what you need to do, the forms you need to fill out, the documentation you need to have. And there are a lot of lenders out there that are willing to do these. I always recommend go to your bank. Ask them first. That's where your accounts are. Ask them if they can help you. If they can, they'll be able to do it in-house. If they can't, they should have a resource for you for where you can turn to then apply for that loan. If you have already applied for the first round PPP and you need to apply for the second round PPP, the restrictions are a little bit more. You need to show that you had at least a 25% decrease in gross sales from one quarter in 2020 to the same quarter in 2019. If you can show that, great. The problem is some people ended up having to spend more money on containers and PPE and other things, and it
Cleaning,
their
yeah,
numbers. Right.
everything. Yep.
And so then they can run into a problem where maybe now they can't get that second PPP, even though they really need it. In that case, there is also a program through the American Rescue Plan Act called the Restaurant Revitalization Grant. This is specifically for restaurants. There is a $25 billion fund that's being put for this. I'm giving this link to Scott as well to share. There are several of these very specific programs that got cut out for the most affected industries. Restaurants is one, live venues is another. If you have music at your site, you may be able to apply for the live venue grant. The grants are free money. You don't have to pay them back. PPP, still considered a loan, but as long as you go through the process, you spend it on the things that you're allowed to spend it on, you follow all the rules, then you are likely to receive forgiveness. I have seen people that have gone through and not paid attention to the rules and spent it on whatever, and then said, so when do they write this off? Or is it just a done deal? And I'm like, whoa, there's a whole process. And they're like, well, I didn't spend it on that. Well, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So
the Ferrari. I mean, it's my brand color. Hey.
There was a guy out there that bought a bunch of watches, got his PPP money and bought a bunch of watches. And they were like, and then posted it on Instagram.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like,
oh goodness.
Please don't do that.
And he was not into time management. Okay. Just
yeah.
yeah.
So there are rules with all of these programs, with all of these grant programs, all of these loan programs. Make sure you read the rules and that you're following the rules, because if you follow the rules, it can really be a huge help to your business. If you don't follow the rules, you can end up being on the hook to repay this money. And if you do, the PPP money, it's super cheap money to have to repay. I think it's a 1% interest rate if you don't follow the rules. But everybody wants these things to be forgiven. The whole point of this is for it to get back into businesses, to keep them operating and not make it a detriment. But if you don't follow the rules, you're gonna meet the consequences of that. So please read through it. And if you have questions, reach out to your banker, reach out to whoever you're applying for these loans through, and ask those questions. And ultimately, if nobody can answer those questions, call me. I will answer those questions. I will help you.
In our original interview, we talked about this isn't about trying to hoard a bunch of cash so that you can, build up these coffers. This is about making it.
This is about
making it through this time, this downturn. I mean, you and I, we're obviously not financial prognosticators, at least
Right.
I'm not, but we talked about it could be years before
Yes.
we return. And I hate to say return to normal because I don't think we'll ever return to normal, but where our businesses now are not reliant on giant government loans, right?
Right. Right.
So
And yeah, we ultimately our businesses have to be able to stand on their own 2 feet at some point,
sure,
but the government's going to try to help the entire economy from falling apart in the interim.
right,
Granted, that money at some point in time is going to have to be paid back. And so preparing your business for success for when those tax bills come due is going to be important. How do you adapt? How do you change? How do you make your business leaner? How do you move with the times? Restaurants are doing delivery that had never done delivery before.
yeah,
They're working with companies that do food delivery services where they go and pick it up. Other businesses are figuring how can I do business online, or how can I adapt my business in a virtual way so I can still be successful.
yeah.
Um,
And let's point out too, this information isn't strictly for those in the restaurant or
oh,
hospitality.
absolutely.
There's still a ton of businesses. I mean, if you own I've got friends that own salons, beauty
Yes.
salons, and a ton of other people oriented. You've got to actually physically have a person there to create business, and their businesses have been impacted. I mean, listen, as much as my stylist wants to do virtual haircuts, it's
You're true.
it's
I'm
hard.
going to ship a robot to your house, and then I'm going to do it virtually. Oh, I don't know if this is
Yeah,
going to work so
it's
well.
drones and AI meet scissors, right?
What could
So
go wrong?
yeah, so this is, just think of this as, listen, if your business has been affected, which let's just go out on the line and say 50, 60, 70% of businesses have, and you're needing some cash. I mean, and we know cash flow is king, and this is what
Yes.
we're talking about today is, there is lifelines out there. And
Yes.
listen, even for me personally, we have not had to tap into these resources, thank goodness. But at the same time, it has brought attention to some of my systems and processes, right?
Right.
Like making sure my paperwork and my accounting and my legal stuff, is in order. Because if we needed to apply, I was like, oh, is do I have all of my business registration information
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
And so even so, this is about getting your operations in a place where they're leaner, tighter. You've got your processes and systems in place. That way, you're not like, oh, what shoebox are those receipts in? And how am I ever going to get be able to prove my income? So,
If you've never used an accountant before, now may be a good time to start using an accountant.
yeah,
I have worked with people that their accounting is their bank statements, and that's not good accounting. You
yeah.
can't get a loan with bank statements. You need to have good accounting, especially in the commercial
Well, you
world.
can with Guido over on Fifth.
Yeah, yeah. But if you want to apply for an SBA loan, you darn well better have some up to date financial statements. Your taxes better be filed. All those things,
Yeah, some
and being prepared for
P&Ls.
that.
Yeah,
Right, and honestly, if you are running your business without knowing how your business did last week, how are you running your business effectively?
yeah,
If you're waiting months to be able to determine how you think you did, you're running from behind the eight ball. You need to get ahead of that, and you really need to be. And this time has proved it more than anything else.
sure.
How did we do last week? You need to know now how you're doing and running your business from today's numbers, not a month ago's numbers.
Yeah, we ask in our world, one of the three questions we always ask starting off is, how many people came to your website last month?
Mhm.
Regardless if you are in a digital, front business,
Sure.
what is the uh, customer lifetime value? So how much are your customers actually worth?
Mhm.
And then what are you doing to measure them?
Yeah.
And if you don't know, and it's even I work with companies that make millions and millions of dollars a year, and they're like, uh, I have no idea. Talk to
Yeah.
they send me down the hall, right? So I
Right.
think I think if anything, one of the things, and we'll talk about this in our next, between a pandemic and economic cycles,
Mhm.
is when the tide comes out, right? It exposes a lot of boats that, are on the verge of sinking. And, and I'm not saying that we needed a pandemic to thin the herd. That's not what I'm saying at all. Every individual that decided they want to start a business, guess what? That is their right. And to run that business and to be self-employed and to hire others and to create something, in your something of value in your community and in the economy, everyone deserves that right that wants to do
Sure.
it.
Sure.
However, like anything, when the tide goes out, whether that's competition rolling in or government regulation changes, or God forbid, Amazon looks at your industry and decides to start doing haircuts, then what have you been doing this whole time? And if you're not shoring up those defenses
Mhm.
and those processes and systems, then, this exposes you, So let's talk about that though, because I
Sure.
enjoyed what in our first conversation, the difference between an economic cycle, because it seems like, every
Right.
7 years we go through a downturn of some sort. So kind of explain that from your
Sure.
viewpoint.
So the U.S. Every economy goes through typical economic cycles, and traditionally economic cycles would last about 7 years for positive economic cycles, and then you'd have a downturn, and then you'd come back. The last three economic cycles have been the three largest economic cycles in the U.S. history, and
Mm,
all three of them ended because of very specific events. Um, the longest economic cycle in U.S. history just ended it was through last February 2020, because coronavirus hit in March and
sure.
everything got shut down. So that ended that economic cycle. It was over 11 years. The previous one, the mortgage bubble, the housing bubble, right? 2008-9 is about where everything sort of fell apart.
Yep.
And that's because, when you're lending people 120% on a home and say, hey, in 3 years, you can just refinance it when you hit your balloon, and then nobody was doing refinances, things tend to fall apart. The one before that was the dot-com bubble in 2000.
Yep.
And so those were in order of the most recent was the longest. The one before that was the previous longest, and the one before that was the previous longest. Three huge economic cycles, and anybody that's been in business over the last 20 years has seen those, and then saw when those popped, when those fell, and we all of a sudden had a decline. It hurt.
Hmm.
And so we've been waiting for this next one to happen. And when coronavirus hit, obviously we had a downturn,
Sure.
but not everything downturned. So it's been a really weird time. We've had some businesses that have excelled during coronavirus. We've had a lot of businesses that have shot down the tubes.
Yep.
A lot of business got put on hold, but because the government has pumped so much more money into the economy, we haven't seen as much of a downturn as we would have had they
Mm.
not artificially kept
So
things going.
it's been mitigation on the
It's been
government's part.
mitigation,
Yeah.
right? So they're really trying to focus on the businesses that have been impacted the most, especially with this last round of money. The stimulus checks are going out. That's going out to a lot of people. The round before that, it was very specific. Did you qualify? Did you not? And by the way, if you think you should have gotten a stimulus check and you didn't get a stimulus check, you still may be able to take those funds on your 2020 tax return. So make sure you talk to your accountant, CPA, EA, whoever's doing your taxes about that. If you're doing it through TurboTax, you're doing it through something else, talk to an accountant or CPA or an EA first to make
Yep.
sure that you're doing things right. Because when you use software to file your own taxes, you're taking 100% of the risk. And
Right.
when you use a professional to do it, they're the ones that are taking the risk, and they may know the right way to do it, where you may say, I think I'm doing it the right way, and end up running into a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So
You leave
I
so
always
you
recommend professionals.
and somebody that's sitting going, listen, our business has been so impacted, I can't afford an accountant. You cannot afford not. How should I phrase that? You cannot afford to have not. You
Yes,
have to have an accountant.
it can cost you more money if you end up doing things wrong and you take you too many write-offs or put things in the wrong way. It can
Yeah.
severely impact. If you get audited, it's 100% on you. I actually had somebody recently that I went through their tax returns, and there was a part of it that didn't quite make sense. And so I asked them, well, where did this number come from? And they said, I don't know. I just put it into TurboTax and that's what came out.
Mm,
That is not a good answer
hmm.
to tell a banker, because that means those tax returns may now be completely unreliable.
Sure.
And if you're trying to borrow money, in this case, $2 million,
That's a red flag for sure.
please pay an accountant or have some sort of professional advice on what you're doing
Yeah.
when you're doing this. And with all this pandemic stuff, all of these stimulus and grants and everything else that's going through, it is money well spent to make sure that you did things the right way. I had an accountant that I spoke with that took over taxes from a client that when she went through and looked at all of the things, she found out that the previous accountant had not done things correctly, had not looked at previous year's returns to then impact those next year returns, ended up having to file an amendment for the previous year's taxes and got that client back $40,000 in things that were missed.
Wow.
And this was hiring a professional to do it, but the professional was rushing through, wasn't spending the time to do it right. So interview your accountant, interview your CPA, your EA. EA is an enrolled agent for those that don't know. They can file taxes. They know what they're doing, but make sure you talk to them and you know that they know what they're doing.
Right.
Some people are just hammering those things through and trying to get them done as quickly as possible because it's a paycheck. You got to have somebody that cares.
Sure.
That's a huge piece of advice, unrelated to all the other coronavirus stuff going on. But the more complicated things get with what taxes could be, and they just made a change, by the way, beginning of March. If you took unemployment and you've already filed your 2020 taxes, talk about an amendment because you may be getting more money back. I talked with one person that if they file an amendment because of the unemployment that they got last year, because of the way that it's counted, they're going to get $3,000 back on their taxes because of it. So if you've already filed 2020 taxes, have a quick conversation with your CPA, EA, accountant. Make sure that everything's getting counted correctly, especially with any new changes that have come through.
Every dollar counts.
Yes. Let's see. You asked me a completely different question, and I totally went off.
No. We were talking about the economic cycle, and this all. It all fits. It all fits because, I've ran businesses in all three of them, and I've lost. The most money I lost was in the .com bubble. That's, that's on me. But so you learn your lessons along the way, right? And so it just seems every downturn is like, for me, before the pandemic came, I actually had begun to shift my business model to reflect what I believe was going to be a fairly sizable downturn, whether it was, mortgage rates, finally being what they should be, or, the student debt crisis finally coming due, or, China or Korea, or, somebody like that, starting to put their thumbs on the US. I mean, how many climate, right? Climate issues.
Yes.
It's like, put your hand in a bag and blindly pull out what could be the next possible reason why we have a downturn, right? So fortunately, we began to shift our business model to reflect that. And so, yes, I do believe that being in business through the last two massive downturns, it gave me a little bit of insight and, what to do. But let's talk about how, one of the things that you brought up earlier was, if you're trying to pay your bills, specifically your rent, think bottom up. I thought that was brilliant. And because, now, like, listen, here's the government. Oh man, my paperwork's not where it needs to be, and I haven't been able to qualify for these loans. But, we've got some revenue coming in. If I could, think about when a business, I have a friend of mine runs a retail, they pay $10K a month for their, for their brick and mortar. Right. And they're like, they sell like $3 products.
Wow.
And I'm like,
a lot of $3 products.
Oh my gosh, they have to sell so many $3 products just to pay the nut on that building, right? And so what can someone do if they've got, mortgage, rent, lease, whatever, and you talked about think bottom up. Let's talk about that.
Yes. Okay. So, number one thing I'm going to tell people to do, communicate. Okay. People that you need to pay money to, if you are struggling to pay money to them, you need to communicate. People are going to be a lot more willing to help you out when you tell them what's going on than if you dodge their phone calls. So if you cannot pay your rent, or if you're struggling to pay your rent, talk to your landlord. Your landlord may be able to reduce your rent temporarily until you can get to a recovery point. They may do it for a year. They may do it for 3 months. Talk to them, see what they can do. They may be able to defer that rent to a later time to make sure that you're recovering. The secret thing here about landlords is it costs them money to get a new tenant in there.
Mm-hmm.
If people are struggling already, getting a new tenant in there means they are losing money every month you're not there. Getting
Mm-hmm.
something in is still better than getting nothing in. Talk to them, be honest. Don't try to strong arm them because that's not going to work, because then you're both just going to be mad at each other.
Right.
But tell them
Blackmail
it's
rarely works. Okay.
yeah, like, oh, well, you better do it, or, you're going to be without any rental income. And, hey, they may have somebody that wants that space that's been
Yeah.
talking to them for years
And
and says, hey,
stealing the
essentially,
copper out of the walls is not a
right,
plan
yeah.
either.
Don't trash the place. You're going to be liable for all that. So talk to your landlord, see what they can do to help you out. I have one client that has a restaurant in their space, and they just completely redid the lease, did an amendment to it, said, we're not going to charge you rent for the next year to make sure that you can get through this.
Wow.
But then when rent starts back up, we're going to start collecting what we missed out on to make sure that the scales still balance. Because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately they're going to be out of pocket that entire time, but they would rather see that restaurant survive and thrive in that location.
Yeah.
Especially because there are going to be a lot of restaurants that are going to fail. There's going to be a lot of businesses that are going to fail. And that also creates opportunity for the ones who figure out how to make it. So following the steps in this podcast could be the difference between you being one of the ones that makes it and one of the ones that not. So talk to your landlord. Talk to your utility companies. Okay. If you have Excel, let them know. They've got a fund set up specifically to help businesses that are struggling and personal. Okay. This goes all the way down to your living situation. If you're paying rent, if you are paying on your utilities and you are struggling there, talk to your landlord, talk to your utility companies, let them know what's going on. It's better than just not paying.
Sure.
Now, if you have a mortgage, and you have not yet talked to your bank, talk to your bank. Okay. This is on the business side. This is on the personal side. I can't tell you how many clients over the years I have had that will be struggling and they'll miss a payment, and the bank calls them and they're like, oh, I better not call them back because I can't make this payment. Well, if you do that enough, the bank starts the foreclosure process.
Because
And if
they
you
think you
continue to
skipped.
talk
They don't know if you skipped town or not. Yeah.
they don't know what's going on. And I'll tell you, no bank wants to actually foreclose on a property. It is a huge pain in the butt. Okay. There's legal expenses, there's time. They have to take the property back. They then might have to manage the property, which is a whole nother thing. And then ultimately they have to try to sell the property, and they're going to try to sell it for whatever they can get to be made right on the loan without having to come after you as the guarantor. If they do have to come after you as the guarantor, that means things have been super depressed and now you're on the hook for whatever they couldn't get made right on. And that's property, that's default interest, that's any past due payments, that's legal. Legal can eat up six figures.
A ton.
No
right.
So talk to them, let them know what's going on. They are going to be a lot more willing to work with you if you let them know what's going on than if you dodge their phone calls. And it sucks. I get it. It's embarrassing to say, I'm struggling and I can't.
I don't have any money.
But the alternative is losing your property, losing your business, losing everything. Have the conversation. It's a tough conversation, but it's well worth having. And you will feel so much better after the phone call. Even if they say there's nothing I can do for you, at least you know what your position is, but they also know what your position is.
Yeah.
And so they then may end up seeing something. Like, I had one of my clients has a restaurant, and they sent me information on the restaurant revitalization grant. And so when they sent that to me, I quickly sent it out to a bunch of others that I knew would be able to benefit from it. And getting that information and wanting to share that, I want these businesses to survive. Why? Because it helps my business to survive.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and that could be a self-serving way of looking at it, but
even your reputation, right? Even your reputation.
Yes.
So go ahead. Sorry, Dan.
No. It's everything. We're all trying to keep each other up here. And I mean, I know a lot of people in the brewery industry and distilling industry, and if they come across something, they quickly share it with each other because they want to lift each other up. This isn't a time to try to say, let me see how I can cut out my competition. This is a time to say, let's be the good people that all rise up together and try to help each other out. And that's the humanistic side of this whole pandemic. Seeing that rise has been really wonderful.
One of the things, and I'm glad you brought this up because I'll kind of personalize that. In Castle Rock, we went from one brewery years
Mhm,
ago, Jar Creek, which was like way ahead of its time,
mhm.
and it closed. And then forever we had really, I mean, we didn't have anything. I mean, we had Rock Yard, which
Okay.
has been around for a while, and then
Yeah, they won some rewards.
all of a sudden we got the beer boom, and we have
Yeah,
like 5 6 7 breweries now,
that's
and
awesome.
they all thrive because
Yeah.
Castle Rock's like its own little beer tour.
Yes.
And instead of going, well, I hope the pandemic knocks out 5 of my competitors,
Yeah.
it's and the thing is that used to be the old way of thinking. I mean, if my grandfather ran a brewery, he'd be like, trying to
Yeah.
sabotage their distribution.
Yeah.
But today it's like the more the better because
Yeah.
it draws hundreds of more enthusiasts or thousands. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think having that mindset that there's plenty to go around. And this also gets back to, let's go back 10 minutes into the podcast about systems and processes. If you
Mhm.
run a business that's run well, you should not have to worry about your competitors.
Yeah.
If you're shortcutting your product, you're treating your customers like crap, you're looking for all the shortcuts, you're not doing the things that run a premier business, then yes, you're hoping those other things happen.
Mhm.
And of course, the ultimatum is you just hope Amazon decides not to get into brewing. That's another story. Um, One of the things I love, and we'll stay on this topic for just a couple more seconds here or minutes, is this bottom up mentality isn't isn't about. I mean, we all know we need to keep a line of communication. You mentioned something, and we'll jump on that subject for a second. Is that communication, even if it doesn't work out, where they stand, they know where you stand, and that helps in infinite. I mean, that just
Yes.
helps you as a professional
Mhm.
at the next turn, right?
Yes.
So even if this listen, the pandemic did us in, we have to shut her down, but we did everything right. Well, when you go to
Yeah.
do it again, the lessons you've learned, and because your reputation of being a communicator
Mhm. Mhm.
and tackling the hard issues, that's going to make the next time you do this even easier and better.
Yes.
And I think
100% agree.
and I think people think that, gosh, I see the stack of bills that have piled up in my, and if I just ignore them, until I can do something again, well, those all haunt you. None
Mhm.
of those go away when you decide you want to start a business again. And if I know anybody that's listening to this podcast, the reason they're listening to this podcast is not because they're going to go join a corporate gig again. They're not looking to get employed. Most of my clients are unemployable. That's why they start their own companies, right?
Right.
So I appreciate that point. Now, one quick tactic around that is, can you tell us a story or a client that you've had that kind of was in this boat and has been able to use these resources and stay afloat during this time?
Let's see. Who would be a good example? Because I've got a restaurant that I could talk about. Um, I've talked a lot about restaurants. Let me see if there is. Well, heck, we'll just do the restaurant because
Yeah,
it's
that's fine.
front of my mind. So, one of my customers is a restaurant. Been in business for many, many years. Actually, has a couple of locations, and one of the locations has not been able to open since the pandemic.
They're just
Cannot
in one of
open.
those counties that the
It's
lockdown's been stricter.
it's because they're near the Pepsi Center,
Oh, oh gosh.
and with no events going on at
Yeah,
the Pepsi Center, and there is no reason to open the facility. They just can't. They can't support it. They can't
yeah,
support the staff. But they've got another location, and they have been able to open because they're a little bit more neighborhood focused, and that's been a huge help. So they got the PPP, they got the EIDL, any money that they couldn't spend on the things that they needed, they held on to. And they said, at worst case, I can pay it back. At best case, I'll use it and I'll do it at the interest rate. But they're actually the ones that sent me the information on the restaurant revitalization and sent it to me and said, Dan, can you read through this and tell me, is this something that I should go for? And
Mm.
should I apply for this? And I got halfway through it and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Absolutely. You need to do it. And the program hasn't opened up yet, by the way, to start application, but you can get all your information together so that when it opens up, there's like a 21-day period at the beginning for very specific people, and then after that, it opens up for everybody else. But being prepared for that is everything. And I talked with this customer throughout the entire pandemic, and we find grant programs that are out there that are specific to restaurants. And honestly, Google your industry and grant,
Yep.
and you may end up finding something that's available. I just had a church that contacted me recently and said, well, how do I get some grants? And I just Googled church grants and I found nationwide programs. And then I did church grants Colorado, and I
Yep.
found Colorado specific programs. And I said, do a Google search, and there is stuff out there. Apply for everything that you
Sure.
can. Anything that you get approved for is free money that could keep your business alive. And so that's
Even the credit card processors, Stripe and Square and several of those other ones are all they've got grants galore.
Yes.
So even if you didn't qualify for one, there's somebody out there that's earmarked some dollars that
Yes.
you have a shot at. So
Yes.
yeah,
I
thanks for
mean, you
bringing
may
that
even
up.
have, if you use a payroll company, they may even have something that's
Right.
available to help you. So this restaurant owner, what did he do? He called everybody that he worked with and he talked to all of them, his suppliers,
Mm,
okay, his lenders, his everybody, and said, obviously, I'm in the restaurant industry and this is what I'm doing. This is how I see the way to move forward. I need to reduce my orders on certain supplies and I need a little bit more time to try to pay you. Suppliers, fine with that. My God, we're making sales. If you need a little extra time, I'd rather give you the extra time and have the sale than see you fail and then all of a sudden, no sales.
right.
Okay. So talk to them, got additional terms, talked to his lender, got additional time, talked to me more, and we ended up going through. Ultimately, being able to go through all of those things is the reason that he has been able to stay in business, keep his employees getting paid, and ultimately have a future in the ability to continue doing this stuff.
Mm. Yeah, and that brings to mind, and I just kept hearing you said this over and over and over today. So it's going to be a highlight of this podcast, and that is number one: communicate.
Mhm.
Whether your vendors, whether it's your landlord, whether it's your employees. I mean,
Mhm.
the thing is, it's like, well, you're like, well, I'm one of those people that hate confrontation, so I
Yep.
just.
Nobody likes
But
confrontation.
no
Well,
one
there
likes
are some
confrontation.
people out there that are like, man, I can't wait to get into a fight. But
And it just makes so much sense because really at this stage, what do you have to lose? I mean,
yeah,
so be transparent, keep the lines of communication. And I'm going to flip this script real quick because
sure.
you've also talked about it at this level is I would rather work with you than lose you.
Yes,
And that
yes,
is the partnership that's the right partnerships you should have. If
yes.
your landlord is only interested in your rent and nothing else, which there are those people out there, if your
Sure,
vendors
sure.
are only interested in the transaction and not interested in your business, find new vendors. And because
100% agree.
customer lifetime value is about how do I work with you if if I own a building and I can, and I have the means to
Mhm,
invest in my tenants so they stay in business
mhm.
and help them thrive versus just collect a rent check, then they're there for a long time and they're not just there scratching and clawing month to month. They're making money because I'm invested in their success versus just the rent check. Now, I know in some scenarios, big giant commercial lenders, you know, that's all they care about is as long as the space is rented
Yeah,
and they're collecting a check. But really, I'll point. Listen, I'll throw shade on those guys right now. If you're a giant commercial operator that has hundreds of strip malls all over the country, maybe invest some of those billions of dollars of profit back into your customers.
mhm,
The actual people that lease and rent those buildings, are they digitized? Are their websites up to date? does your own marketing department, create a marketing department to help your tenants? I mean, there's an idea right there. You're like, yeah, but
Yeah.
we don't make any money off of that. Well, yeah, you
Well,
do
if
if
it's
you
in
help them
business.
make money,
Right. Right.
you know?
And people are going to remember the ones that helped them during the
Right.
pandemic. Everyone's going to look back to 2020 and say, where were the people that were helping? How did they, even if it was just with information and sharing of ideas,
Yeah.
or if they said, I can't do anything, but I'm going to keep an eye out for you, and I'm not gonna kick you out of here if you can't pay the rent. We're going to figure this out. But if they say, if you can't pay, you're gone, and I'll have you filled in 2 days, that you may want to look at who you're working with.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes down to your vendors. If they're saying, I don't care about the livelihood of your business, just like you were saying, you got to find ones that do, because they're the ones that want you to succeed.
Yeah.
And that's where relationships are everything in every business. In every business, relationships are important. And if you don't have good relationships with your vendors, your lender, your landlord, with all these different things, when times get tough, you don't know where you can turn. You don't
Yep.
know who's going to help you. And I guarantee you, everybody that's in business that's listening to this, when the pandemic hit and they knew that they were going to run into hard times, they knew exactly who they were going to be able to call and have a good conversation with, and they knew who they did not want to have a conversation with. That may be a telling point.
Yeah, lessons learned. Holy cow. Yeah, this has been fantastic. Dan, tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you. We're going to obviously put some links and stuff like that, but you're on LinkedIn.
Yes.
You're at the Denver Bank or Bank of Denver, and you've got resources that you've shared. So we'll put those out. But if they want to reach
Yes.
out to you personally, how do they do that?
Sure. You can call my cell phone, 720-837-8666. You can email me at dkiel@tbod. So that's D Kiel, like Dan Kiel, or there's my name,
Right there.
like
Yeah.
Dan Kiel. So dkiel@tbod, that stands for the Bank of Denver, TBOD, dkiel@tbod. I am highly Googleable. So if you put in Dan Kiel Denver, you're going to find my information. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, I don't accept every LinkedIn connection. However, if you reference this podcast in your message to me to connect via LinkedIn, I will connect with you.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been, super insightful. We didn't get down into the weeds with all the different processes and ways, but listen, it starts with, communicating that you need some help, understanding that where you can turn. We'll have a list of resources for you. Obviously, you can reach out to me anytime and or Dan. And then at the end of the day, those that are, really striving to do it the right way and get through this. I'm going to tell you, resilience and grit are two incredible attributes for an entrepreneur. And if you've been in business for 20 years, you don't need to hear those words. But if this is your first real test as a business owner, and you're like, holy crap, I have, and you survive this, oh my gosh, you're going to be able to pretty much survive anything. And honestly, too, this comes back to what our foundation is as a business, which is customers, lifetime value. And when you look at not only your customers, so think about it, the food, the chain, right? The domino effect. When the people above you are interested in your success, and then you're interested in your customer success, whether you're a restaurant, a venue, you're a bank, you're in healthcare, regardless of your industry, if people are willing to invest in you and you're willing to invest in your customers, oh man, you've got the foundation of a fantastic
Absolutely.
business. So
Yes.
any closing comments that you want to make?
Yes, I should mention my bread and butter is lending on commercial real estate. So that is where my expertise mostly lies. I love to be a resource for people. So if you do have questions about things, or you need to be connected with somebody, reach out to me. I love to make connections. I love to make sure that people have the right resources available. I do loans directly for my bank in commercial real estate, and I also broker loans. I am a commercial mortgage broker for my bank. I may be the only person in the country that is both a banker and a mortgage broker. There may be others that exist. I have yet to meet one, but I get to hold both. I get to hold both because I helped create that for this bank. And I've been doing this since 2006. I've got a lot of experience. I worked for an entrepreneur for 6 years in the middle as well. So I understand the entrepreneurial spirit. And ultimately, if you've got questions about commercial real estate, where things are going, how the market's doing, where interest rates are right now, happy to provide that information for free. If you end up wanting to pursue a loan, then it may be something I can do in-house. It may be something I can do with another lender. But ultimately, if it's anywhere in the country and it's going to deal with commercial real estate, purchase, refinance, construction, please use me as a resource. I may have good avenues to take you down and ultimately get you the deal that you need.
That's awesome. And yeah, and I hope we send some quality people to you as well through this. Ultimately, the insight and the knowledge you shared today was incredible. I think if this could be the best 45 minutes you've spent this week, if you're listening to this. And of course, as always, we'll have the resources and some links on this page. And I look forward to our next conversation, Dan. Appreciate
Likewise.
So much your time, and it was a blast. Heck, every time I talk to you, I learn something. So I was literally taking notes while we're talking. But again, appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you out there.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Scott.